I'm fascinated by Charles Dickens, not only for the articles and short stories and novels that he wrote, but also as a historian of the times. And Charles Dickens, as he fascinated me, Charles Dickens was also fascinated by the police in both England and America, because he did travel rather extensively lecturing in the United States. And in fact, if you look through his short stories in his books, you can find that many of his characters who are portrayed as police officers, particularly detectives, are based on people he actually knew and admired very much. Charles Dickens is really credited with being the first author to introduce a detective into modern literature. He loved the police. He loved them, he admired them, he had great admiration for their skills, and he boasted about them a lot. I can give you an example in one short story entitled, or an article rather, entitled On Duty with Inspector Field, which was based on one of his personal friends. Dickens put himself in the shoes of the criminal and was trying to get across the idea that the criminal had a lot to worry about, from not only the detective but the police, the new police system, because the London Metropolitan Police were created about 7 years prior to the publishing of Dickens' first novels. And Dickens said, on behalf of the criminal, and to know that I must be stopped, come what will, to know that I am no match for this individual energy, meaning the detective, and the keenness of this organized system. He was talking about the new police. He admired them quite a bit, and he gave us a good deal of information about the kinds of people who were police in those days. Now we have a little bit of a problem, obviously, because the world has changed, certainly since the days of Dickens, and certainly the police have changed with it. Now this is when we talk about the police in the context of crime in America, it's an extremely complicated subject. It's a whole bachelor's degree in college. Now today we'll only have a chance to talk about one or two things, and I've chosen what I felt were perhaps two of the most important. That is, what are the police supposed to do? What is the police role? And what are some of the problems of the police? And maybe I can slip into a little bit about what the police are doing today to improve themselves. Now, the police are an extremely important part of the criminal justice system. They comprise the largest percent of people involved in the criminal justice system. Most of the criminal justice budget is for the police. They are also the most visible. We see them. We don't see judges too much, or at least we hope we don't see judges too much, but we don't see judges on the street. We don't see or recognize probation officers and parole agents, but we do see the uniform, and they stand out. They also, because of the high visibility and the high ratio of contacts with the public, come in for probably the most criticism from the public also. It's not a very nice job at times. It's a very rewarding job at times. But it's a lot of tasks and a lot of things that society has left up to someone. Some friends of mine have compared it to following a parade with a shovel. There are just problems that society has left and relegated to the police. At times it's a very nasty job and a very difficult job at best. Now, if we talk about the police role, what is it that the police are supposed to do? Well, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we want the police to do? What is it that we, as citizens and collectively in society, ask the police to do for us? Well, first of all, and probably most important, but is minimized quite a bit, is order maintenance. The police evolved out of social chaos, and the police reforms are pretty much associated with very chaotic times in our history. And we talked about this in a very early segment of this series. We can only have to look at the 1960s and the kinds of reforms in the police that have come about. Order maintenance, that is to keep tranquility in society, to preserve the peace. Now, many times we think of order maintenance and also preserving the peace in local terms, such as keeping a bar fight from erupting into a much larger problem, keeping a family dispute from erupting into a larger problem, a noisy auto, preserving the peace. Order maintenance means protection of the political economy. It means protection of our society. It's a very basic, fundamental part of the role of the police in the United States. We many times associated the most, let's say, important part of the role as crime related. It is order maintenance. Now, another aspect which is really part of this century, and that is crime prevention. We would like the police not to react, that is not after the fact and go out and try to do something about crime, but really to try to go out ahead of time and try to reduce the possibility of prevention of crime. This is a phenomena, this part of the role is a phenomenon of this century, and we can go back to August Vollmer, who we mentioned in the historical segments, probably called the father of the modern American police. He was very strong on prevention and really was the one that began the American police to think about it. But if you look, for example, in college catalogs prior to the late 1960s, you won't find anything referring to crime prevention. Now you find that as part of the normal curriculum in a college course, you have a class called crime prevention. It's very common throughout the United States. And we're talking about the police being involved in active programs, programs aimed at juvenile delinquency, programs aimed at anti-burglary kinds of things, to reduce the amount of burglaries, such as talks with citizens, neighborhood groups, neighborhood watch groups, talking to citizens about home security, business security, talking about prevention of crimes, sex crimes, and things of this nature. So this is going out and making people aware of problems, what to do to perhaps reduce the possibility of something like this happening to them, also to what to do if something does happen to them, anti-robbery and this sort of thing. It's no longer a reactive kind of police in America. It is a proactive, going out actively and seeking things in which they can help other agencies and individual citizens to do in terms of crime reduction. Now, a third and very important part of the police role obviously is the investigation of crime. If number two doesn't work, that is, you can't prevent it, and you do have a crime, then obviously the police have to become involved. And this was not necessarily a strong feature of the police in years gone by, but the police have really done an amazing amount of work to increase their investigative capability. Not only procedurally, not only by training themselves, but the introduction of the physical sciences, not at the state crime lab, but bringing it down to the typical average detective or investigator who can use these tools. Police have done a lot just in the last decade. A fourth part of the role would be to help people recover things that they have lost or have been stolen. There is property that's taken in thefts, there is property that is mislaid, and the police are constantly working with citizens trying to reunite them, not only with missing persons, but with missing purses and missing bicycles and some of these, some things like this. Now, these functions, these are very fundamental functions which we normally associate with a police role. There's perhaps one more that most college textbooks and most articles don't really include in this enumeration of the basic police role, and that's services. The 1968 Presidential Commission on Crime and so forth had some studies published, and they estimated that about 85% of the average police officer's time is spent in providing services to the public, that is, non-crime related services, and that only perhaps 15% of the time is actually spent in enforcing the law. Now, criminologists will argue about this ratio, how exact, how precise it is, what may be considered to be a service might be crime-related, and so on and so on. But the point is that the majority of the average officer's time is not spent in crime-related issues. He is not out investigating crimes. He is not arresting people. He is providing a lot of services which we, the public, have included in the role. And these are mostly miscellaneous services. Now, many are justified. I mentioned, for example, missing persons. Certainly, if you have a small child, an infant who is missing, you want the police in there. That's not crime related, but it certainly is a very important function of, excuse me, of the police. And I've been involved in many such searches, looking for missing children and also missing juveniles and missing adults. Now, we also expect the police to provide information at almost any hour of the day. Is tomorrow, for example, if you have a town or a city that has parking meters, is tomorrow a legal holiday? Can we park without getting a ticket? Can you tell me who I call in such and such a situation? Some of them are absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. Some of the things that we expect the police to do, which takes away from their time in trying to handle crime and crime-related situations. If you ever have the opportunity to, if you don't know a police officer, ask them about some of the phone calls that the police department will get. If you ever run into a police dispatcher who handles all of these incoming calls, talk to them a little bit and ask them, what are the kinds of things that people ask the police to do? And you will be absolutely amazed. Johnny has a little temper tantrum because he could not have a peanut butter sandwich at lunchtime. He runs into the bathroom and he locks the door and he will not come out. Mother has the couple of options. One is to kick in the door. Another option is to call a locksmith. Another option would be to bring Daddy home, and the locksmith is going to cost money, Daddy is going to be angry, and she can't get the child out. Call the police. I could go into stories about sick seagulls, people wanting storks taken care of because they were ill, and I could just regale you with all kinds of strange stories. Parents will call and ask the police to threaten their child because they will not eat their dinner, that sort of thing. It goes on and on and on. These are demands of the police officer's time made by the public and expectations. And this is one of the big problems with the police today. We wonder why there are burglaries. We wonder why burglars are jacking up houses and carrying entire houses down the street. And where are the police? Well, the police may be getting a cat off a roof, and they may do all kinds of things. So, as citizens, we must remember that if the police at some time are not as effective in reducing crime in our area, it may be because we place a great deal of demands on their time which have absolutely nothing to do with enforcement of laws or investigation of crime. And it's very difficult to have it two ways. We can't demand that they spend 100% of their time dealing with crime and at the same time demand that they spend 85% of their time getting cats out of palm trees. Now, the functions can cause some confusion and they can cause some problems for the public and the police officers. We must remember that police officers have very basic tools as any other occupation. They have the laws. The laws not only tell them what they can do, but what they can't do. And I've been involved in many situations where a citizen is terribly irate and wants the police to summarily take their neighbor down to the public square and hang them tomorrow morning, execute them by hanging them right on the flagpole, right underneath the American and state flag. And you point out to them that you can't really do this, that the law does not allow you to do this, and they don't understand, and they become very upset. And they don't get upset necessarily with the law, and they don't get necessarily upset with the courts or anybody else. They get upset with the police. And this is a problem. So you have to understand that the police are limited, and this is a basic protection of democracy. It's a basic protection. If we had unbridled police power as they have in other countries, we as individual citizens would have a tremendously difficult time. We would not have as much personal freedom as we do now. Unbridled police power is a direct and dramatic threat to a democratic form of government. Now, another problem is that we're not all in total agreement. We don't have a total consensus of what the police will do. There is one group over here that wants the police to take some action, and usually there's a group that wants exactly the opposite kind of action. And this produces an ambivalence in the police. They're listening to one and listening to another. And the expression, if I can paraphrase it here for public viewing, is we're darned if we do and darned if we don't. Became very popular in the police language, that we'll do whatever you want, meaning the public, just tell us in a clear way what it is you want us to do. Otherwise, we're in big trouble. And you find that perhaps, rather than, as the public thinks that maybe the police over-enforce the law, perhaps the police under-enforce the law, because it's much easier to take absolutely no action and not be criticized than taking some action and getting criticized from some opposing viewpoint. There are all kinds of problems like this. Now, the role itself can create problems for individual officers. If I'm talking about preservation of the peace and, let's say crime prevention, I'm talking about a kind of behavior that we expect from the police that is helpful, service-oriented, that is friendly and open. And if I'm talking then about criminal investigation and this sort of thing, I'm talking about arrest, and I'm talking about perhaps a different kind of set of circumstances that perhaps is not so friendly. So there is a dichotomy, there is a duality in the role. One is supportive and one is repressive. And sometimes this is very hard for the public to understand, and sometimes it's very difficult for the police officer himself to deal with. Give me one little example. Crime prevention, safety, and that sort of thing. An officer drives to an elementary school, and he's met by all of these little moppets running around asking him the usual question, is that a real gun? Is that a real badge? Meanwhile, dropping the remnants of a half-eaten ice cream cone down his half-Wellington boots and putting little marks all over the car. And he's there telling them about bicycle safety, about making hand signals and obeying the stoplights and that sort of thing. And he is officer friendly, isn't he? He is trying to relate to the children and have the children relate to him. Now, that's a kind of set of situation or circumstances that set up a very supportive kind of environment. Now, the same officer walks out to get back into his car, and he finds that a couple of those little moppets have slashed all of the tires on the police car and have written obscenities all over with crayons and that sort of thing. Is probably only up to the emblem because they're little, they're kind of short and they can't write too high. And he finds all of these obscenities all over the place. And what does he have to do? And some little kid says, Johnny did it. Well, now he's got to go right back, and he's got to grab Johnny and Sam and Bill and Dave, and now he has to get them in their clutches and say, you've done a no-no, and the whole thing, and he comes on as Mr. Repressive. Now, that is kind of a simplistic kind of example that I've given you, and it may not seem like such a big deal, but for the police officer to push the buttons to be, how are you, how you doing, and in the next moment say, you know, like Matt Dillon used to do in Gunsmoke, hold it right there, or I'll blow you out of your shoes, something like that. Psychologically, the role can produce some rather drastic problems for individual police officers. Not all, but some. And some officers deal with it in different ways, in that an officer may decide that I can't deal with this polarization of behavior, and he'll ignore one. And you'll find an officer, for example, that will be, you know, the friendly police officer all the time, and he will just ignore everything else. And the other officer may not be able to deal with that side of it, and he comes on like Attila the Hun. You have parked 6 inches into a yellow zone, and you find yourself up against the car hood, spread eagle, being searched with a shotgun out there, and you may think that, gee, this may be a little too much for the kind of activity that's involved. And it may be that you have a nutso police officer who should be fired, but it also may be a psychological response to some of the problems having to do with the role and dealing with the public. Now, generally, over the past 2 decades, the police have improved dramatically. They have made great strides. Some later historian will probably use the late 1960s and the decade of the 70s as a very, very important transitional period in the American police. There has been tremendous change, generally in the police. Unfortunately, not everywhere. Not everywhere, for many reasons. Attitudes, budget, we can name all kinds of things. But generally speaking, the police have made dramatic changes for the better. Let me give you some examples. It was not too long ago, and still in some parts of the United States, when if you wanted to be a police officer, all you did is walk in and say, have you got a job? And the chief would say, well, you look like a good enough person, and my brother-in-law knows you. Why, certainly. And that was it. And in some parts of the United States, that may still be it. All right. You find that there are some screening devices that are being used. Not always so, but they're being used, and it brings a sophistication, greater sophistication to the selection process that was not always there. You can have, for example, intelligence tests. You can have psychiatric examinations. You can have background checks. You can have oral board interviews. You can do all kinds of things. And many of these are now becoming very common kinds of procedures for the police in selecting their people. You see, the problem would be that if you just don't know somebody and they come and want to be a police officer and they go out and machine gun vast numbers of trick-or-treaters at Halloween, you're going to have a little problem with the public, aren't you? And you can't just say, well, back to the old drawing board. You have a responsibility to select the best people possible for that job. I'll give you one example. There was a story, and I don't know how true it is, but it illustrates it. I used to, and I better watch out about naming the town, but it's a small town in the San Joaquin Valley that I loved very much and still do. And I taught there in that city for many, many years. And there was a story about an old-time police officer who arrested a drunk on a street corner. And the problem was that he couldn't spell the name of the street. It was a rather difficult street to spell. And so he walked the drunk over 1 block because then he could report that the drunk had been arrested at like 3rd and Main Street. 3rd, the numeral, in Main he could spell, but over there he couldn't spell. Those days are going by. They are going to become bygone days universally. Generally speaking, those days have gone. Training. Training has been talked about for the last 90 years. And it is only in the last decade that training, at least at the entry level, has become almost a universal phenomena for all police officers. Based on the leadership of California, the state of California primarily, and New York, most states now have a state commission which oversees the selection and training of officers. Now, the average citizen may not realize this, but the concept is to have all of your officers in a state have the same basic training, the same knowledge, so that there is standardization, but also you're assured that they all have this fundamental level of occupational information. And then what happens, once you establish that for all officers, then you can raise it. You can keep building it up and building it up. Hopefully what you are doing by this is making them better trained, more effective, and more efficient. And it's rather important, but it's only been in, say, the last decade or so that this has come about. And now you find that there is training that's going in almost every state, in advanced officer training, in specialized areas and assignments. And you find that training is being given to sergeants, supervisors, never given before. You also find that there's training given for middle management people, which was never done before. Who will reap the benefits? Obviously the police will, but eventually we all will reap the benefits of this kind of change, because hopefully it will make the police job a little easier, it'll make the police a little bit more effective, and we will all share from the fruits of their labor. Another phenomena is education. College was not unusually, let's say in the early 1960s, to find someone who was applying or seeking a job who had some college, but it was not all that common. It wasn't rare, but it wasn't common either. And since the 1960s, with the proliferation of college programs in the criminal justice system, not just for the police, but for other areas of the criminal justice system, such as probation and parole, there are more and more and more and more college-educated people entering the field. It is not unusual today in a basic training academy for the police to find someone who already has a master's degree. That is not uncommon at all. It's not the general way that you're going to find things, but it's not uncommon. In the early 1960s, it was almost unheard of. Now, in the early 1960s, for example, there were only about 100 junior college or community college and four-year institutions that provided any college courses for the criminal justice system. And today that's nearly 1,000. And even if the officer comes in without college, most departments will encourage their officers to go back and get their degree. We are not rapidly getting to the point where all officers will have a college degree, but we are rapidly reaching an area where many officers will have some college credit and some coursework. Now, the whole idea is not to have a PhD running around in his cap and gown with a badge on. That's not the idea. It's the idea that through educational courses, the officer will be better able to relate to the public. He will be better able, let's say, to solve problems. He will be able to understand his environment. The Japanese have, for many, many years, specifically trained their officers in Japanese culture. And I could show you pictures where you have a Japanese police academy where they're learning flower arranging, and they're looking at bonsai trees and so forth, which may seem a little peculiar or strange to us, but the total concept is, for the Japanese, is to know your heritage, know your people. And they've progressed a lot farther and a lot faster than we have. But we're on the way. We are on the way. And we find that police officers are, let's say, a little bit better able to solve problems and to deal with the public and interact with the public, which is really important. There are other changes, administration changes. Well, the basic organization of the police has changed very little. There have been some experiments with trying to change some things about the police organization, but there are not that many, and they haven't been that successful. The police basically are set up as a paramilitary organization. Basically, they are structured like a military unit. There is organization by function, such as traffic, jail, investigation, patrol, and so forth. But you have this hierarchy of, chief, captain, and so forth, all the way down to patrolman or deputy, whatever it may be. But within this framework, this organizational framework, you find that there are administrative changes that are occurring, in that the police have many times stolen concepts from business or other behavioral sciences and adapted them to their own occupation. They have also taken the concepts of the early kernels and from that evolved into something. Let me give you just one example. For many years, not all that long, but many years, in private industry and business, or also in public management, in the public sector, you've had examples of organizations who have used the concept of management by objectives. That is, what it basically means in the old way, you have your basic role, and you're just going to go out and do it every day and hope that you, kind of like a net, you pick up all the pieces and catch all of the little things that are about to fall through, that you have kind of a sieve effect. Now, management by objective is a proactive thing. You're going to go out actively and seek out something. There is an objective out there, and you are going to manage to achieve that objective. Now, the police, for example, will use management by objectives, let's say, to pick out a #1 problem in their city or their community. Let's take, for example, burglary. And they say, well, burglary is our greatest problem. Residential burglaries are our greatest problem within the burglary thing. Well, all right. This is what we're going to do this year. We are going to try to reduce significantly residential burglaries. And what you do is you go about your normal business, but also you attempt to manage to achieve that goal. For example, if you have funds available for training, you may use those funds to send some of your people to advanced courses or special seminars in residential burglary or some kind of other burglary. If you have community relations money or community relations people that are doing many things, you may emphasize neighborhood talks on how to prevent burglaries, so that your whole organization is doing its routine everyday things, but it has some object out there which it is going to try to resolve in some significant way or in any way possible. Now, this was not necessarily true. You didn't find this kind of administrative thinking necessarily in all departments, nor do you find it that way today. But you don't find it, let's say, in the 50s. What you really find today is this kind of thing. A lot of innovation, a lot of new systems, a lot of analysis of problems, and from this analysis, new administrative procedures. Certainly having to do with the reduction of crimes like burglary and robbery and so forth, but also with long-range planning. Long-range planning. What is our police department? What are our needs going to be at the end of 1990? What can we do? What can we start setting up now to make that easier to reach that goal that we want in 3 years, 5 years, whatever it may be? We are doing more with specialization. We are doing things, for example, procedurally. And this is not a new concept, but it's a fairly recent one, and that is that the number of people getting involved. For example, managing your people to be available not just from 8 to 5 and from 5 on and so forth around the clock for convenient shifts, but to organize and assign your people to hit high crime times and also high crime areas. You have the concept of team policing, which we borrowed from the English. Instead of having a grid of a beat here and a beat next to it and a beat next to it and so forth with 1 or 2 officers on each one, we'll use that area, entire area as a district, and we'll use those 3 or 6 officers to be generalists, to go out and select crimes and crime areas within that area and focus in on it and try to reduce that. There's a great deal of, there's a growing flexibility mentally in in the thinking of police administrators, which is a marvelous thing that's occurring. Again, it's not universal, but it's getting there. Things, for example, another thing I could mention as an example is legal interns. Mostly you'll find this in the large cities where they can afford it, or they are close to a law school. But let's say that an officer has a problem. He has a person he thinks is a suspect for a crime. Now, he's had some training, but he doesn't have the experience of an attorney, and he doesn't know what the little intricacies of the law will be. He wants to go out and make a just, a correct, a legal arrest. Some cities, for example, have hired their own legal advisors who the officer can talk to. Now, certainly he can do this with the district attorney's office, but the district attorney's office many times is overburdened with their own work. And also, they may not be available at 3 o'clock in the morning as readily as, let's say, having your own legal advisor there. They'll use this kind of concept. The officer can call them up and say, boom, this is it. Now, don't take this wrong. I am not denigrating district attorneys and what they do, but those people just have a job that's unbelievable most of the time, a lot of work. The police will work out with law schools where third-year law students will come into the police department and be available for questions concerning search and seizure and arrest and the handling of evidence and this sort of thing, which is a great help, absolute great help. Now, we can also talk about innovations in technology, and we could spend 100 hours talking about that. The era of Buck Rogers, the era of Dick Tracy, technology is here. We have all kinds of things that are going on. Now, here's a term that I'd like you to think about, and it's called criminalistics. Criminalistics, not criminology, criminalistics. Criminalistics is part of criminology, the study of crime. Criminalistics really refers to people who work in the lab, in the forensic science area, who deal with the physical evidence in ascertaining what it is and how certain things. If you have something under a victim's fingernails, to analyze what it is. If there is dirt on a shoe, you can compare it with the dirt found at the crime scene, and this sort of thing. That has improved tremendously, dramatically in the last decade. Communications, record keeping, the use of computers has really done a tremendous amount of good things for the police. Now, we also have the area of community relations that I mentioned once before. And I want to stress it again. The police have really improved. Now, in the old days, it was assumed that each officer would be their own independent or collective, let's just say independent community relations officer. And then collectively, if each officer was out doing his interacting with the public properly, you would have a total effect of a positive community relations program. This is not necessarily true. This isn't necessarily true. It didn't always work out this way. And in the past decade, you have seen the creation of community relations bureaus within police agencies, or the assignment, if it's a small department, you cannot enjoy the luxury of that specialization, you'll have the assignment of one officer who will be assigned as a community relations officer to interact with the various groups of people as well as individuals within a community. This is very important because the police really cannot determine their direction or their role without this input. And it works two ways, and that the police, by educating the public and by interacting and being aware of needs in the community, can do their job much easier and much better, and can, as I say, also educate the public in some of their problems. This was not always the case. This was not always the case. Many police departments had the attitude that we know what we are doing, and we'll do the best we can, and we'll put out a few releases in the press once in a while to tell the public what we're doing. This is really PR, public relations. It's kind of telling a story, like you're selling a commodity. Community relations really refers to a two-way interaction. And many police departments did not have that two-way interacting going with the community. And in the last decades, there have been great strides that have made to improve this. We live in a time of great tensions. And we probably will go through even greater tensions in the future, perhaps. And at a time when we really need the very close cooperation between the police and the community, we really need community relations to develop this cooperation. And this is what's happening. And this is rather exciting. Now, another area would be in research. Not only we have toys and gadgets and so forth, but there's a lot of research that I've alluded to. For the first time, the federal government is directly involved in providing funds and people and interest and motivation to do research in the area of criminal justice. We also have it at the state level. We also have it at the local level. There are, in the decades since, or the decade and a half since the mid-1960s, we've got all kinds of things going on. A criminologist or a police administrator or anyone involved in the criminal justice system today probably could not keep up with the amount of data that is coming in. It's very much like future shock. You're just overwhelmed by the amount of data. This was not always true. This was not always true. If prior to the 1960s you went to some academic journals like the Journal of Psychology, the American Journal of Psychology and so forth, the Journal for Sociology, and on and on and on, you probably would only find 6 articles written on the police or anything having to do with the police. Now the amount of information is absolutely devastating. Devastating. But at the same time, it provides us with a very bright outlook, doesn't it? Because it allows the police more time, gives them more data to understand their job and to improve their job and their job capabilities. It also tells them a lot more about themselves. It also tells them a lot more about the community. And this hopefully makes things run a little smoother. Now, there are some there, I'm sure, that saying this guy is some kind of Pollyanna, that I don't really understand reality. Well, certainly there is a certain, something can be said that not all police officers react in the proper way. And maybe in the future, maybe there will not be miraculous things. But I think when you look at what was being done in the criminal justice system before and what has been done now, you can say, yeah, there is movement. And that movement is positive. It may not be the movement that some people would want, but there have been great strides in the last 2 decades. And that makes one feel rather optimistic about the future. Still not perfect. Still not perfect. The job itself, as I say, is a very difficult job at best and sometimes a very nasty one. The job itself creates problems that may never be resolved. May never be resolved. And there are some things that maybe we just will never have the opportunity to eradicate from the American scene. But let's look at some of the problems that we have and why perhaps we will not have instantaneous kinds of success with the police, let's say in the next 6 hours, 6 months, and so forth. And it's a long, ongoing process. There are a lot of ongoing problems. For example, let's just take one of the things involved in our society, that is authority. We don't like authority too much. We like to consider ourselves to be very independent and as free from authority as possible. Some of you may remember back to the dark, dim past, and you may have rebelled against authority in school. The dean of boys, the dean of girls, that sort of thing was authority. Don't run in the halls, don't do this. And you probably had some rather unkind words for these people doing a very difficult job. Parental authority. Gee, my parents won't buy me an $80,000 Maserati. And if your parents had just bought you an $80,000 Maserati, you don't have to worry about this. But we do rebel against authority. Remember that we rebelled against the British to start this country. And the police, we have authority